This is a lesson on estimating percents, Chapter 5, Section 5. There's really no other way to get around some pain here, and that painful part is you have to memorize these facts. If you're going to be good at estimating, you have to know some facts to help you out. The good news about that is, if you can remember that percent means out of 100, some of these blocks fill in pretty easily. 1%, that means out of 100, 1 out of 100. 10% is 10 out of 100, which reduces to 1/10. 100% is 100 out of 100, which is 1. This block is also easy because you're so used to working with quarters, as in the coin that's worth 25 cents. So a 25 cents, 25 out of 100, is a quarter. 50 cents would be 2 quarters, which reduces to a half. If you have 75 cents, just like 75 out of 100, where a dollar is 100 cents, 75% would take 3 quarters. So this is pretty easy to use some connections that you already have. If you can remember that, you have to memorize this one. 20% is 1/5. If you double 20%, you get 40%. If you double 1/5, you have 2/5. So if you get this basic one, you can generate the rest of the fractions that go with 20, 40, 60, 80, counting by 20s, counting by fifths. 20%, 1/5. Double 20, 40%, double 1/5, 2/5. 20%, 1/5. Multiply that by 3, you get 60. Multiply this by 3, you get 3/5. Every time you add a fifth, you add 20%. Every time you add 20%, you add 1/5. You have to memorize this one. 12.5% is 1/8. But you could also say, wait, 12.5 is half of 25. And half of 1/4 is 1/8. So you can use this fact to help you remember this one. This is not in the chart in your book, which, by the way, does appear in your book, this whole chart, so you can get it off of there. But if you know that 5/8 is 4/8 plus 1/8, and 4/8 is a half, and a half is 50%, and an eighth is 12.5%, you can figure out that 5/8 is the sum of 50 and 12.5%, or 62.5%. You can do that to get 7/8 also. If you add another 1/4 to this, you add another 25%, add another 1/4 or 2/8 to 5/8. So add another 25, you get 87. 87.5% for 7/8. 16 2/3% is 1/6. You can kind of associate the 1 and the 6 with 16. Be aware that that doesn't work very often. If that worked, you'd say that 5/8 is 58%, but it's not. But it's just a clue that can help you remember 1/6, but you also got to remember to tag the 2/3 along there. This occurs so often that you probably have it. 1/3 is 33 1/3%. If you double 1/3, you get 2/3. If you double 33 1/3, you get 66 2/3. So if you have to memorize it, you have to memorize it. You can use some of the memory clues to help you get it. Now we're going to talk about how that applies to estimating percents. There are 2 kinds of things we're going to talk about. Percent of a number, like 20% of 60. And the part compared to a whole is another thing we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. So to find 20% of 60, this is going to be, to get this exact answer, won't even be an estimate. You can remember that of means multiply, and you can just multiply these 2 digits together. 2 times 6 gives you 12. And then you have to see, is that a reasonable answer? Because it might be 120, or it might be 1.2, or it might be 1200. Is 20% of 60, is it reasonable to say it's 12? Which comes to the other method you could use to convert 20% to 1/5. You could figure out what 1/5 of 60 is, which would involve dividing 60 into 5 equal parts. If you do 60 divided by 5, you get 12, which tells you this is the right answer. So there's the 2 strategies. You can either multiply, or you can convert the percent to a fraction, and then divide the whole thing, which 60 is considered the whole thing, into 5 parts. If it was 40% of 60, we would do 4 times 6, we know it's 24. That would be 2/5, because 40% is 2/5. Again, you can divide 60 into 5 equal parts. That's 60. Each one would be 12. Which gets to the part that you have to double the 12 to figure out that it's 24. And all this should be, you shouldn't have to draw pictures, just to help you understand why it works. You just do it hopefully really quickly in your head, but it comes down to the other thing that if you have your multiplication facts memorized, this is not difficult. If you don't have them memorized, it's going to be a lot harder for you. Suppose we wanted to do 33 1/3% of 21. Again, this is, you probably don't want to do 33 times 2, but if we did, that would be 66. 66 is obviously not a reasonable answer, maybe 6.6. And that's not a bad estimate, but there's a way to get, on this one again, an exact answer. Think about what fraction is 33 1/3%. That's right, it's a third. A third of 21. Divide 21 into 3 equal parts, and each part would be 7. So 6.6 is not a bad estimate, but 7 is the exact answer. Sometimes we're going to just round off our numbers and use compatible numbers to get an estimate. So we want to know 42% of 25. We might remember that 40% is 2/5. So you might think of it as 2/5 of 25. So we've rounded this number. We're finding a compatible number. A number that's close to, but not exactly the same as 42%. But it goes pretty well with the 25, because you can split 25 into fifths very nicely. And each 1/5 would have 5. Again, if we do the rectangle, it would be 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Sorry about that, that's pretty bad order there. Total of 25, and 1/5 is 5, so 2/5 would be 2 5s, or 10. So that's just an estimate, because this is rounded off, and that's the gist of this lesson, is to be able to compare two numbers, and maybe you don't get it exactly, but you get it pretty quickly. So if you went to a restaurant and your bill was $40, and you want to tip 20%. You want to do 20% of 40. This is really easy to get exactly. Just do 2 times 4, and you would have an $8 tip. Or you could say, well, I know 10% of 40 is 4, and if I double that, I get 8. Or you could say 20% is 1/5, and 1/5 of 40 is 8. If this was $41, you probably get by with tipping $8. You might say, oh, I'll do $8.25, because I know it should be a little bit more than $8. Now let's look at, what if you're given a part in a whole, like 9 out of 19. And we're going to learn later on that percent. And we want to know what percent this is, that's our goal. Percent is the same as the part compared to the whole. So if we compare 9 to 19, like a ratio, then that's representing the fraction, which would be what, 9 out of 19 is what out of 100. Well, 9 out of 19, if we round it off, it's about a half. 9 is approximately half of 19. We can round this down to be an 18. So we're looking for compatible numbers. Our goal in this lesson is not to get an exact percentage, just to get an idea of what's reasonable. So 50% would be a reasonable estimate for 9 out of 19. How about 10 out of 31? Well, that's close to 10 out of 30, which reduces to 1/3. So now you have to ask, do you remember what 1/3 equals as a percent? That's why it's going to be easy if you remember them, have them memorized, you're good to go. If you don't, you have some work to do. You need to memorize the fractions and their percents. The ones that we had up on the board earlier, they're in your book. You just got to memorize them. What if we had 253 out of 499? Well, we want some compatible numbers here. So think about what you could round 253 off to. What could you round 499 to? What would be easy to calculate? And I hope you're thinking 250 out of 500. Because 250 is half of 500, and half is 50%. So the answer here would be 50%. Do one more example. What about 82 out of 324? What percent would that be? Yeah, let's just say, knock that 2 off, knock that 4 off, and we got 8 out of 32. 80 out of 320 is the same as 8 out of 32. 8 out of 32 reduces to 1/4. Got that memorized? Sure you do. 25%. It's not exactly 25%, but that's not the goal. We're just trying to estimate what 82 out of 324 would be. So we learned how to do things like 30% of 70 by doing 3 times 7, or 3/10 times 70. And we learned how to do things like 2 out of 5 by saying that's 2/5, 40%. That's the gist of the lesson.